Before we dive in, a brief disclaimer. Please note that the webinar is for informational purposes only. It's not intended to offer advice or guidance on legal or investment matters. Such advice can only be given with full understanding of each individual's specific situation. That being done, let's meet our panel. Josep Turró is managing partner at the agency Barcelona. Over the past 10 years, Josep has established himself as a leading figure in Barcelona real estate, specializing in value-added projects, property development, and investment properties. We also have Shane Clark, president and co-founder of Euro-American Financial Advisors. He specializes in financial advice and investment management for Americans moving to and living in Europe. Shane has been an expat himself for 15 years and holds an MPhil in economics and the European Financial Planner designation. So without further ado, over to you, Josep.
So this is Catalonia at a glance. You know, it's one of the regions in Spain, as you know. There are 8.1 million people living in Catalonia at the moment. The province that is in light pink is the one that we're going to be talking about. That's 5.9 million inhabitants. And within it, there's the key area around Barcelona, which is known as the metropolitan area. And that's 3.4 million people. And then within that, there's Barcelona City, which is 1.7 million people, which is the area that we will be focusing most on. So if we zoom in, we'll find is there are two ways of describing the Barcelona region. There's a way that you might sometimes hear reference to, which are the comarc. That is not the, let's say, the most frequent way to refer to the regions, but you'll hear about them occasionally. So the ones that are considered to have parts of Barcelona are the ones around the Barcelonès, so that includes Baix Llobregat, Vallès Occidental, Vallès Oriental, and some bits of Maresme. I would say that's, you know, those are the core relevant comarcs. But more generally, we think of the metropolitan area of Barcelona as being the 36 municipalities that you have on the map in the right. So that's Barcelona, which is the big one in the center with a whole bunch of areas around it. If we look more specifically at the area around Barcelona, I would just want to highlight two areas that have many international buyers, which are not in the metropolitan area, but are close to the city. One of them is Sitges, that you've probably heard about. And another area is more the Maresme area that has some towns like Llavaneres or Sant Andreu de Llavaneres, Vilassar de Mar, and Alella Tallà that might be of interest, obviously close to the beaches and just very pleasant and quiet environments in which to live. If we now zoom and look at the metropolitan area of Barcelona, we put a circle around areas that are particularly attractive for international buyers and American buyers because there are schools, because of the quality sometimes of the properties that you find in these areas. So I'd highlight, of course, Barcelona. Then there's the area of Esplugues and Sant Just Desvern. You have the American schools located in that area, and it's a bit more suburban. You have Sant Cugat del Vallès, which is an area that also has a big international community. And then Gavà and Castelldefels, that are areas that are closer to the airport, closer to the beach, and also very popular with international buyers. If we zoom further, and now we're in the Barcelona municipality, so that's one out of the 36 that you've seen in the other map, you'll see that there are 10 districts that Barcelona is made out of. And the most popular ones are the ones that you can see in the circles. So this Sarrià Sant Gervasi, which is in the northwest. Next to it, there's another neighborhood within the district of Les Corts called Pedralbes. You have Eixample, which is the grid in the city center, and then Sant Martí, specifically Poble Nou, which are the neighborhoods by the beach, which international buyers and American buyers in general tend to find very attractive. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll maybe just to summarize some of the key attractions of these different neighborhoods, which I think should be the focus in general of international buyers looking to buy in Barcelona. You have Eixample, the city's basically architectural showcase. Is where you'll see a lot of the Gaudi landmarks, modern apartments, very easy to get around, lots of shops and restaurants. Sarrià Sant Gervasi, which is a more refined, perhaps, area. It's quieter. There are more schools, more families. It's a very popular area. Pedralbes, which is adjacent to Sarrià Sant Gervasi, perhaps a little bit quieter, greener, with more villas. And then I said earlier, Poblenou, which is closer to the tech hub, to all the areas that are busier, but also near the seaside. So that basically gives you a quick overview of the different types of areas that should probably be your focal points if you are looking to acquire a property or move to Barcelona. Obviously, there are many other areas that are very interesting, but these, I would say, are sort of the conventional wisdom. Moving perhaps now to the second point, the issue of pricing. So pricing in Spain is quite complicated. I think one of the aspects of it is that comparable data is not really publicly available in general. Okay, so you really need to work with trusted advisors to understand the reality of the marketplace. And also, there's a very big distinction, I would say, between properties that are in a good condition and properties that need refurbishment. So one of the things that we do in the agency is on a monthly basis, we look at all the properties that we're seeing advertised in the marketplace for over €1 million, and we see where those offers are. And we try and find the properties that we think offer most value, because those are the ones that give us a closer indication of where transactions are likely to close. So these are the results actually of something that can give you a sense of what the price per square meter for a property that's refurbished in a very good condition, okay, might be offered at currently in the market, that you might be able to acquire at a 5 to 10% discount to the advertised price. So in Les Corts, where you have these two neighborhoods which are very attractive, one's called Pedralbes, the other one's Les Corts, we found some properties. These are obviously large properties. We can also find properties that are a lot smaller. But just to give you a sense, a 200 square meter apartment that's in a very good condition, you probably have to pay something close to 7,000 or 500 maybe, euros per square meter to acquire a property of this size. In Sarrià Sant Gervasi, if you look at the bigger villas, you might be able to get a nice home for something in the region of €4 million. In Eixample, you might be able to get an apartment that's in the 200 to 250 square meter for close to €2 million. Probably, the difference between square meters and square feet, I mean, it's 1 to 11, but you can probably just add a zero, and I'll give you a sense of what the price per square foot is. I remove a zero from the number on the right. Ciutat Vella is the old city. I've just included that for reference. And then Poblenou, again, it's a bit of a mixed bag because it used to be a more industrial area. So you had parts of the seafront where you might have kind of high rises, condos that are quite pricey, probably close to the 9,000, 10,000 euro per square meter mark, if they're in good condition. And then you might find assets that are in need for refurbishment. So again, a lot of information to absorb here, but the bottom line is that prices for properties that are in a good condition tend to be fairly consistent throughout the city. There are some specific neighborhoods where you maybe have to pay a 20 or 30% premium, or you might find a 20 to 30% discount. But this kind of gives you a ballpark. Perhaps turning to the price dynamics. So we picked these 4 neighborhoods and looked at one of the popular portals in Spain and looked at what the evolution of prices has been over the last 5 years. So here you have these charts. Obviously, the prices that you'll see in the little box are lower than the ones I indicated. They're a blend of refurbished and properties that are not in such a good condition. But I think the general trend is that we see that Barcelona is picking up and that prices are really, price increases are accelerating. So we think this is a very interesting time to look at acquiring properties in Barcelona. Interestingly as well, these price increases are actually affecting some of the better neighborhoods in the city too. One of the positive things is that you have very precise insights per neighborhood in terms of where offered prices are. Then the question is really like where are closing prices, and that's somewhere where we can really help at the agency. If we now turn to the process of acquiring properties in Barcelona, I would say that it's fairly secure and safe, but that it's important to work with the right people, of course. So let me just run, before we get into that, let me just run into some of the key aspects of how you go about transacting. So the first one is, what documents do you need? So you'll need a NIE, which is a foreigner identification number. It's fairly easy to obtain in a way, but it can also there can be delays in obtaining this number. So it's something that you have to have on top of your mind so that it doesn't prevent you from, getting a deal done. You'll need a valid passport to be able to obtain the NIE. It is highly recommended that you get a Spanish bank account so that you can manage the payments and taxes and expenses related to a property. And of course, if you choose to get a mortgage, or in general, just for the, purposes of KYC and so on, you just want to be able to prove the source of the funds that you have. On some occasions, you might want to complete on the transaction without being present, in which case you might want to translate a power of attorney and have it apostilled so that someone can act on your behalf in terms of completing a transaction. What are the steps to be able to, secure a property? In Barcelona, it's quite common when you see a property and you're interested, you may be asked for 1% reserve payment. That's 1% of the purchase price of the property. And that usually will mean that the property, usually not always, but usually will mean that the property will not be shown to other buyers, and it will give you enough time to sign an arras deposit, which is the one that really tends to commit you to the purchase of the property. It tends to be 10%. If you walk away from the deal after having signed the arras, you'll lose the deposit. If the seller were to tell you that they don't want to sell the property to you anymore, usually they'll have to return the 10% to you and pay another 10% on top. It's rare, but it can happen. And then completion can be very quick. It can happen. What tends to slow it down is usually obtaining a mortgage. So you probably want to count on 2 to 3 months. I would say that something that I think is very good about the Spanish system generally is that to complete, you're at a notary, which is a formal figure. That's the one that recognizes the validity of the transaction. There are certain specificities that I'm happy to discuss on another occasion if anyone's interested in, but that's the general drift of it. So it's in that regard, I think it's a very it's a very well organized system. In terms of the cost of the transaction, obviously, apart from the purchase price, you have sales tax, which is, I think, not that common in the US. And there are two types. If you're buying a new build property, which is, there are not that many new build properties here. There are, but at the moment, most of the market's secondhand, I would say. You'll pay typically 10% of this VAT, IVA. If you buying a secondhand property, you pay something called ITP, and the percentage that you pay will depend on the value of the property, and basically can range between 10 and 13%. You probably face some other legal costs from the notary, from your lawyers and so on. I think it's safe to add another 1 to 2% to the cost of the transaction. I think it's very important that you work with the right advisors. Some buyers sometimes don't do that. I think it is very risky. So you definitely will want to have a legal representative. You'll want to have someone that helps you with the tax, because there's some tax associated with owning property. And really, where we come into the picture is that we try to give our clients the best experience by giving them a sort of fully managed process, right? From obviously identifying the properties, helping with valuation, which is an important consideration as well. There are quite a lot of elements that can come up in terms of urban planning and just general due diligence of a property. And then, of course, the whole process. So that's basically where the agency comes in, and we're happy to, and we regularly help our clients connect with the right types advisors and trusted advisors. So yeah, I mean that basically in short is what we think is most important to know about the marketplace at the moment. Just a few words on the agency. So the agency is a global network. We're the fastest growing boutique luxury brokerage at the moment, with over 140 offices worldwide in about 14, 15 countries, I think now. And we're growing at a rate of about 30 offices per year. And our mission is very much to accompany clients that are looking for a white glove service in their purchases of luxury wherever it is that they need help, and to really deliver a top quality service and advice. So yep, that's us.
Thanks very much. That was fantastic. Loads of detailed, in-depth, useful information. Thank you very much. So now we'll hand over to Shane Clark, President of Euro American Financial Advisors.
Hi, everybody. Let me just share my screen here. There we go. Well, thank you. That was very interesting, Joseph. I actually learned quite a bit myself, so appreciate that. I think I'm going to talk about how that aspect fits into your larger picture in terms of investments as an American living overseas, as well as touching a little bit on investing in real estate. So a little bit of background on us. We're in Sevilla, where we're licensed with the Spanish investment authorities as investment advisors. We also have a sister firm in the US in the San Francisco Bay Area called International Asset Management, which has been around 22 plus years. And between the two firms, we manage your portfolio with the US firm, and then we provide the cross-border financial planning investment advice here out of our Sevillan office. So let me jump in. Something we often get asked is, okay, I want to invest in real estate. Maybe you can't find a specific property. You might be looking at investing in a private equity fund that invests in many properties in Spain, or an alternative investment fund. And you can do that as an American, but it is going to trigger, in most cases, PFIC reporting, which is Passive Foreign Investment Corporation, for your US taxes. So we would say if you're thinking about investing in a foreign fund, it's best to look at what you want to accomplish with that, and then also speak to a dedicated professional tax advisor who can review how that's going to impact your US taxes. And then in general, we always get asked these questions. Why is it so complicated being an American, investing overseas? And it's really, the main pillar there is the citizenship-based taxation. So the US is pretty unique in this regard. Once you have that blue passport, you need to file a tax return in the US every year, which is not the way it is for most every other country in the world. Most countries have residency-based taxation, where you would just file and pay in your country of residence. However, the US, we have the both system, where you file in the US, you pay locally typically. And then the next one is FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And this essentially says that when you moved over here, if you've been here for a while, you probably know when you open a new bank account, you have to fill out an additional reporting requirement form that goes back to the US. So any accounts abroad, you need to report back to the US. Another one is foreign bank account reporting, which is any account you have at a bank that's over 10,000, you need to report that back to the US. And if you have assets over 200,000, there's another form you need to report back to the US. PFICs, this is the one I just talked about. So passive foreign investment corporations. Any foreign mutual fund, exchange traded fund, in some cases, a money market fund, Alternative investment funds, private equity, hedge funds, any type of a fund really would fall under PFIC reporting. And the IRS every year is going to tax it at the highest possible rate, as well as sometimes an additional interest fee with deferring payment. So our tax advisors always tell our clients, avoid PFICs. And then the next one is Markets in Financial Instruments Directive. And this is what regulates us as a registered entity, as an investment advisor. And it gives you consumer protections that are different than what you'd have in the US. So that's one thing we always think is important, to work with an advisor who's actually regulated to work in the EU, in Spain. And as well as having, someone who's registered in the US, it's a nice kind of dual package with additional benefits to you. The last one is PRIPS. So it's packaged retail investment and insurance-based products. Always a mouthful to say that. But this one, probably you've done some research looking at, okay, I want to invest in US exchange traded funds, US mutual funds, and you find that you can't through your US broker if you're using your address in Barcelona. This is why. So this essentially is a piece of EU legislation which says US funds need to produce this key information document in order to sell them to people living in Spain. And the US funds don't produce that document. They can't, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So this is the reason why you can't buy US ETFs. And there is a workaround, which I'll discuss in a minute. But essentially, our service then is offering cross-border investment advice. So we have kind of two different main services. One is the investment advice. So we look at, okay, how can we structure your investment portfolio, maximize your returns, optimize your taxes, all for your given level of risk? How can we do that in a compliant way, both in Spain and the US? And then the next one is financial planning. So we look at, this is where you're at today. We prepare 3 personalized financial statements and then push everything into the future. And we get an idea about, given your level of assets today, given the goals you want to accomplish, what probability of success can we get for achieving those goals? This one, I think it's often kind of overlooked when you think about having an advisor over here for your investments. And what I always think about is, if you're in the US, you wouldn't work with an advisor who isn't licensed in the US. You wouldn't want to work with a Russian licensed advisor, for example. So I think it's the same thing over here. You want to work with somebody who understands the laws, the compliance issues, your rights as a consumer, and that's something that we've done. I have the European Financial Planning designation. My partner in the US has the Certified Financial Planning designation. We're both expats. That's part of the reason we set up this business in the first place, is seeing how complicated everything is and trying to find a nice solution for everybody. And then this one, we kind of break it down when clients first come on board in terms of, all right, your financial situation is complicated, and there's kind of 3 buckets. There's things you need to do before you move, things you need to do just after you move, and then ongoing issues that everybody needs to look at and make sure that they're compliant on and maybe revisit. So for example, estate planning. So people, you want to have a good estate plan in place. That's not something we offer in-house, but we have partners, attorneys who understand both sides of the Atlantic. And it's a good idea to have a will notarized at the minimum, and then in due time speak to an estate planning attorney. Real estate, I think we just heard a great presentation on that. It's a good idea to review your real estate situation, your portfolio, private health insurance, all these types of things. We want to look at and make sure that all of our clients have good contacts for, if it's not something we offer in-house. And then financial planning. And there's lots of issues I think people look at that it's nice to have really a technical analysis of. So renting versus buying. What are you trying to accomplish? What's your financial situation? What makes the most sense? There are some hidden costs of living in Spain. We want to review those as well. We often get asked about US Social Security. You worked 10 years in the US, you've worked 20 years in Spain. Where do you get your Social Security from? So all these types of questions we answer in the financial planning process. A big question also is custody. So where can I custody and which brokers will work with me? Well, a lot of times in the US, once you move over here, US brokers won't work with you anymore. So sometimes people use a US address. Sometimes you work with the brokers who will work with you, and those are Charles Schwab and Interactive Brokers. There's benefits to both. With Schwab, if you work with a US registered investment advisor, they classify you as an institutional client versus a retail client. And in that situation, you can continue to buy US exchange traded funds, which is great. Interactive brokers, you can trade on any exchange in the world. So we actually have a pool of assets traded in Europe, individual equities, stocks, individual bonds, all in euros that we can hold for clients. And that's quite interesting. It's a nice way to get currency diversification, mitigate that risk, and hold money in euros if that's what you'd like. And then also in terms of custody, you can custody assets overseas. So you can custody assets at a Spanish bank, in Switzerland, Ireland. There's lots of options there, especially these days. We're hearing that question a lot. And I think it's important to ask, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to mitigate risk from the US financial system? Are you trying to mitigate risk from the US dollar? So there's lots of questions there. And I think it's important to look at all of those in terms of choosing where to custody your assets. Another big issue is tax reporting. So a lot of times people, or if you're on the golden visa, for example, people are looking at if you have assets abroad, you still need to file those US tax returns. So you need US tax reporting forms. You need 1099s to show your capital gains every year, show dividend payments. And that's going to be important for if you get audited by the IRS. So I think custodying your assets with a compliant US expat broker custodian is really important for getting those US tax reporting forms. Another big difference is SIPC insurance. So in the US, we're used to 500,000 for each account. Over here, if it's a brokerage account in Ireland, it's 22,000. If it's a Spanish bank, it's 100,000. So there's some nuances there as well. I've talked a little bit about this, managing currency risk. If you're in the US, lived in the US your whole life, you just have US dollars. You move over here, you have euros. If all of your money is in US dollars, your expenses are in euros, that's a risk we need to mitigate. There's a couple ways to do it. You can do it indirectly, where you hold US exchange traded funds that then buy European equities or fixed income. And then you don't actually exchange the currencies yourself, but you hold those assets. So if the price of the ETF goes up from the euro appreciation, that's reflected in the share price. The other way to do it is directly, where what I mentioned before, trade on the European exchanges, hold a pool of European stocks and European bonds. And that's something that we do actively manage. Some other issues, exposure to the US, I think once you live over here, we tend to look at the portfolios being around 50% US exposure, 50% international. So it's quite different from a US advisor. We also hold around 10% of the portfolios in gold, which has done quite well recently. It's a nice hedge against inflation. It's a nice way to kind of even out some volatility in the markets. And I think tax efficiency, individual equities, individual bonds are generally speaking more tax efficient than funds. So we actively manage that portfolio as well. And then buying real estate, I think working with a professional like Joseph just discussed, making sure that you have all the proper paperwork, somebody's reviewed this, you've got a good team in place, you have an accountant, somebody who's reviewing the US side of it. And then if you're looking at buying a property, it's much more easy to fall in love with a property than it is with your Apple stock. So I think we need to look at any investment as an investment. So we need to look at, okay, what's the yield? What's the upkeep? Just like we would with any individual fund or position as well.